The van smelled like rubber and regret, the thud of its engine keeping time with the clutch of men inside. Stone Ridge Prison rose up with the same grim architecture as every other place designed to swallow people whole. High fences, concrete faces, and towers where men watched other men turn into something else. Elias Ward stepped down from the transport without swagger or story. He wore plain clothing folded under a gray jumpsuit. He was broad enough to have been useful in 100 violent trades, but he moved like a man who'd practiced being small for a long time, like someone learning to make his shadow a less dangerous thing. His hands were clean. His eyes were even cleaner, quiet and precise, like a window you could look through without catching the frame. The intake officer read the paperwork the way a man reads weather, names, dates, charges. The line behind him muttered and jostled. A few heads turned when the name landed. Elias Ward, like it might be a headline. But headlines don't get you past offenses. Only habit and force do. Elias moved through the procession with the kind of silence that made men in the van glance at each other. Some assumed quiet was fear. Others assumed it was posture. Some assumed nothing at all and kept their eyes on the floor. Bruno Cray saw Elias first. Bruno had a face shaped by fights and loyalty to his own noise. He owned the yard by sound more than by muscle, by how his laugh cut the room, how his boots scuffed authority into the concrete. He liked men who made the place feel familiar, who reinforced the idea that strength was a broadcast. Quiet bothered him because quiet implied a story he couldn't easily rewrite. He watched Elias from the cracked wooden bench where his crew gathered, the bench that had been passed down like a throne. When Elias paused near the benches to accept a standard-issue blanket, Bruno's grin sharpened. "See that?" he said to his boys without raising his voice. "New meat." The boys laughed, a practice chorus. They saw Elias's broad shoulders and assumed to fight, the kind that everyone could still understand. For Bruno, every newcomer was a petition for dominance. For Elias, the world would have to accept that he wasn't asking for anything. They placed Elias in Block B, Bunk 5, between two men who recognized that silence was a tool and respected the shape of someone who used it well. He unfolded his blanket with careful motions, folding edges as if the tiny symmetry could hold back the chaos of the rest of the place. He didn't make a mark of arrival. He didn't shout to anyone. He lit a small candle he'd hidden in the lining of his jacket. Cheap wax, a flame smaller than a prayer, and set it on the narrow shelf above the bunk. The flicker cut the cell into softer angles and, for a moment, made the concrete feel less like accusation and more like a room where one could try to breathe. Kai Ramirez watched from the far bunk. He was 19 with a face that still remembered summers, not winters, and an appetite for myths. He'd spent less time making enemies than being robbed of future, which made him a study in quick loyalties. When the quiet man took his place on the bunk without a fuss, Kai watched him with the kind of hunger that looks for a teacher and settles for a story. "You knew?" Kai asked, voice hushed because curiosity in Block B was sharper than insult. Elias nodded without surprise, folded his hands on his knees, as if practicing a meditation. His voice, when he answered, was low and measured. "Yes." Kai found relief in the one-syllable exchange, like a kid who'd learned that some questions have small, clean answers. He slid to the edge of his mattress, eyes bright with the kind of attention that can turn a man into a legend before he's earned it. Word moves faster in prisons than anywhere else. In the mess hall that first night, the cutlery clanged like a jury. Men swapped stories about Elias's charge. Rumors spread like smoke about a framed job, about an agency that discarded him, about money and deaths, and a life he would not claim. Bruno watched him eat and flick crumbs like an accusation. He liked food fights because they were simple, understandable warfare. He reached for the easiest cruelty, a shove, a scoff, a tray knocked just so. "You sure you don't belong with the lawyers?" Bruno called out across the room, voice carrying with practice cruelty. Elias kept his gaze down and chewed. A man next to Bruno spilled a drink in the exact direction of Elias's shoes. The room expected a scene. They expected a roar. They'd seen quiet fell apart enough times to bank on it. Elias placed his napkin to his tray and, without looking up, simply said, "I don't want your trouble." That small sentence landed heavier than anyone thought it would, not because it threatened anything, but because it drew a line, the kind of line that said, Try and you'll find where I stop being small. Officer Mills watched from the sidelines like a vulture with a badge. He had the kind of smile that looked friendlier than his actions. He'd served years in the agency equivalent outside these walls and could read a man's history by the stiffness of his shoulders. Elias's posture flagged something in Mills he hadn't expected to see again. Training, yes, but refined into restraint. It annoyed him. The agency had a rule about men like Elias. If they could be made to bite, make them bite hard and make it look like instinct. Mills liked a simple life where men did as they were told and the guards wrote the stories. He made a note to keep an eye on the new quiet man. There was profit in pushing the right buttons and amusement in watching the sparks. That night, when the cell lights dimmed and the chorus of chains and muffled TV laughter softened into the sleep of men who had exhausted themselves with survival, Elias sat at the edge of his bunk and traced the candle's tiny flame with his eyes like it was a map. He didn't write letters. He didn't call anyone. He folded his hands and counted breaths the way a man counts inventory. Careful, practical. Kai drifted closer and watched. "What did you do before?" he asked, voice small against the concrete. Elias didn't look surprised by the question. He had been asked before. He had learned the look men gave when they wanted to slot him into their stories. "Taught men a craft," he said slowly, and the words were careful, like stones placed to build a wall. Kai imagined prisons and government black ops and men who never returned from shadows. He imagined fame or horror or both. He imagined a man like Elias as a storm. Elias smiled the faintest edge of a smile that didn't hide the cost. "I am trying to be something else," he added. "Quiet is part of the plan." Outside, the yard lights flickered, and somewhere far off, a radio laughed. Bruno and his boys finished their cigarettes and made plans about what to test next. Officer Mills taped a notebook shut and tucked it under his arm, eyes already cataloging behaviors as if he'd been paid to. Kai lay awake a little longer, thinking about training and the taste of power, and Elias breathed in and out like a man who decided the only fight worth having was the one inside his own chest. Stone Ridge accepted arrivals like it accepted weather, without apology. But inside Elias, something settled with the night, a discipline that had reasons and regrets, and a determination that was not loud. The quiet was not emptiness. It was the shape of a man who had once taught others how to end lives, and now swore to teach himself how to live with one. The first night closed and the prison slept, but in Block B, a new story had quietly begun. On the second morning, Stone Ridge woke with its usual symphony of metal shouts and the mournful scrape of boots on concrete. Breakfast lines moved like tired animals, shuffling forward without intention. Mondays were always worse. Guards were grumpier, inmates were hungrier, and the entire place breathed resentment like secondhand smoke. Elias joined the breakfast line with the same quiet presence he carried everywhere. Shoulders relaxed, expression neutral, eyes lowered not in fear, but in measured awareness. Bruno Cray spotted him instantly. Bruno walked with the swagger of a man who believed everyone was an obstacle or an audience. His boys flanked him. Marco, thick-necked and always smirking, and Darnell, whose knuckles were so perpetually wrapped in bandages that no one remembered what his hands actually looked like. The trio cut through the line like they were exempt from waiting, because in Bruno's mind, rules existed only to reinforce his position. When Bruno reached Elias, he didn't speak at first. He just stood there, looking Elias up and down with the amused curiosity of someone inspecting a puzzle he'd already decided to break. Elias didn't step aside. He simply remained exactly where he was, giving Bruno no reaction and no excuse. Bruno's grin widened. "Still quiet, huh?" he asked in a voice loud enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Maybe you ain't understood how things work here. Maybe you think silence equals respect." He leaned closer. "But silence around me? That's disrespect." Elias didn't look at him. He kept his gaze straight ahead, watching the serving window, as if Bruno were another piece of background noise. "I'm not disrespecting you," Elias said calmly. "I'm surviving." That answer wasn't what Bruno expected. It wasn't fear. It wasn't defiance. It was something in the middle, neutral, steady, unbothered. It irritated Bruno more than an insult would have. "Surviving," Bruno repeated, laughing. "From what?" Ain't nobody here that wants your trouble. He shoved a hand onto Elias's shoulder. Except maybe me. Elias's body swayed only a hair. No flinch, no tensing, no shift into a stance. Just steady breath. Kai watched from 2 trays down, eyes widening as he saw Bruno lean in. He had hoped Elias's quiet would keep him under the radar. But prisons didn't allow men like Elias to stay invisible for long. Kai felt a sick tightening in his chest as Bruno's boys circled. Bruno pushed harder. Look at me. Elias didn't move. Look. At. Me. Bruno repeated louder. Finally, Elias turned his head. Not sharply, not aggressively, just slowly enough to show Bruno that the silence wasn't fear. The cafeteria quieted. Men watched over trays of watery eggs and gray oatmeal. Officer Mills leaned on the doorway, arms folded, waiting to see how this new tension unfolded. Some guards like resolving conflict. Mills preferred watching it evolve. Bruno's smirk wavered for the first time. Something about the way Elias looked at him, calm, clinical, unreadable, felt wrong. Dangerous in a way Bruno couldn't identify. Bruno knew fists, tone, posture. But Elias didn't communicate in any of those languages. What are you? Bruno demanded. Some kind of monk? Elias shook his head. Just a man who doesn't want to fight. The honesty in that statement outraged Bruno more than an insult would have. No one cares what you want, Bruno snapped. And then he punched him. It wasn't a warning punch. It was a full, heavy hook thrown by a man who built his reputation on raw force. His knuckles cracked against Elias's cheekbone with a sound that made the cafeteria gasp. Elias's head snapped sideways, but his body didn't fall. He staggered only a step, catching himself on a nearby table. The shock on his face wasn't horror or anger. It was disappointment, a quiet sadness that sat in the space where rage used to live. Kai's breath hitched. Elias. Mills didn't move to stop it. He wanted to see what happened next. A punch like that would have sent most inmates collapsing to the floor or scrambling to strike back. Elias didn't either. He touched his cheek gently, feeling the warmth spread across the skin, and turned back toward Bruno. His eyes didn't harden. They didn't widen. They didn't betray any old instincts waking up inside him. If anything, they softened. That softness rattled Bruno. What's the matter? Bruno growled. Hit me back. Elias shook his head. No. The entire cafeteria held its breath. Someone muttered, he's crazy. Another whispered, he's scared. A third said, no, man. Look at him. That's not fear. Bruno shoved him again. Harder. Fight back, coward. Elias steadied himself. You don't want me to fight, he said quietly. You think you do, but you really don't. Bruno threw a second punch, wild and vicious. Elias stepped back just enough that the blow grazed the air near his jaw. Not a dodge, not a counter, just a shift, a small adjustment born not from fear, but from calculation, from a mind shaped by thousands of hours teaching others how to strike and avoid strikes. Bruno didn't notice the technique, but the older inmates did, the ones who'd seen real fighters, the ones who knew the difference between luck and training. He moved before the punch landed. Someone murmured. That wasn't instinct. That was skill. Mills heard those whispers. They confirmed the suspicion scratching at the back of his mind since the moment he first saw Elias Ward. Bruno swung again, angrier, sloppier, and Elias stepped back with another small, precise movement. He wasn't running. He was reading, analyzing, letting the storm burn itself out. Bruno was breathing harder now. His punches came with more desperation, less form. Elias could see the telltale signs. Tight shoulders, narrowed vision, predictable timing. Fight me? Bruno roared. Elias exhaled slowly. I won't. Bruno threw the hardest punch yet. And this time, Elias did move. A single step sideways, nothing more. Bruno's fist sailed past air and struck the metal edge of a table, sending a crack up his wrist that made him shout in pain. The room erupted. Some laughed. Some winced. Some stared at Elias like they were finally seeing the truth behind his silence. Bruno clutched his wrist, face contorted in pain and fury. He started to lunge again, but Marco grabbed him, whispering frantically, "Boss, stop. Not now. Not like this." Bruno glared at Elias with pure hatred. "This ain't over," he spat. "You hear me? I'm coming back for you." Elias nodded once. "I know." He picked up his tray and walked away, calm as if nothing had happened. But the cafeteria kept watching him long after he sat down, because silence had just survived a punch. And silence had moved like someone who knew exactly how violence worked. Kai slid into the seat across from him. "Why didn't you hit him back?" Elias looked at his hands. "Because I know what happens when I fight." Kai frowned. "What happens?" Elias didn't answer, but in his eyes Kai saw something. A past filled with men more dangerous than Bruno. A past Elias wanted no part of ever again. And in the shadows near the door, Officer Mills smiled, because a man who refuses to fight is either harmless or hiding something worth uncovering. By lunchtime, the punch Bruno threw wasn't just a moment. It was already a myth in the making. Stone Ridge was a factory for rumors, and the inmates who witnessed the cafeteria incident couldn't retell it fast enough. Every retelling twisted the story slightly, sharpening the details the way men sharpen shanks, with intent. Some said Elias barely moved and the punch simply missed. Some said he predicted the punch before it came. Some said he had eyes like a hawk and reflexes like someone who'd been in more fights than Bruno could count. And the most dangerous rumor wasn't about the punch at all. It was about Elias's reaction. He didn't even flinch. He didn't get angry. He didn't fight back. That's the kind of guy you don't mess with. Men in Stone Ridge weren't used to quiet power. The loud ones made sense. The muscle-bound ones made sense. Even the crazy ones made sense. But a man who could take a punch from Bruno Cray and walk away calmly, that unsettled the entire food chain. Kai Ramirez felt it first. He walked through the yard with a sudden sense of borrowed prestige. Other inmates nodded at him, not because they respected him, but because he was the closest thing to understanding Elias Ward. Kai found Elias near the side fence where the yard's noise didn't reach. Elias sat cross-legged on the dirt, eyes closed, breath steady, meditating like he was somewhere far beyond the concrete and chain link. Kai approached cautiously. "You okay?" Elias didn't open his eyes. "Yes." Kai hesitated. "You know the whole yard's talking about you." "I figured. They're saying you used to fight." "I didn't." Elias paused. "Not the way they mean." Kai sat next to him. "So what were you? Army? Marine?" Elias finally opened his eyes. "No." "Some kind of fighter?" "No." Kai frowned. "Then how'd you do all that? How'd you move like that in the cafeteria?" Elias didn't answer right away. He picked up a small pebble, tossing it lightly in his palm. "When you spend enough time observing violence," he said slowly, "you learn how to avoid it." Kai waited for more, but Elias closed his eyes again, ending the conversation. Across the yard, Bruno paced like a lion whose cage had been rattled. His wrist was still swollen from hitting the table. The pain wasn't what bothered him. Pain was familiar. What ate at him was a confusion. A punch was supposed to do something. It was supposed to control the room. It was supposed to make a man crumble. But Elias had taken it like a teacher reviewing a mistake. Marco approached carefully. "Boss, maybe leave him alone for now." Bruno glared at him. "If I back down, the whole yard will smell it. You want that?" Marco shrugged. "I just think he ain't normal." Bruno's voice dropped. "Nobody is normal in here. I don't care what he is. I'm not letting some quiet nobody make me look weak." But even as he said it, Bruno's jaw tightened, because deep down he knew something wasn't adding up. In the guard tower above the yard, Officer Mills stood with binoculars trained on Elias. There was a familiarity in Elias's stillness, a trained relaxation Mills had only seen in men who never acted until they had already won the moment. He muttered to himself, "You're not just some quiet inmate, are you?" Another guard, Peterson, walked up behind him. "Looking at the new guy?" Mills nodded. "Yeah." "What? You think he's trouble?" Mills didn't remove the binoculars. "I think he's a question." Peterson snorted. "He's nobody." Got jumped by Bruno and didn't even fight back. Sounds like a coward. Mills lowered the binoculars slowly. No. Sounds like someone who knows what happens when he does fight back. Peterson raised an eyebrow. You saying he's dangerous? Mills smirked. The dangerous ones are never the loud ones. Back in cell block B, Elias returned to his bunk quietly. Some inmates nodded to him. Some stared. A few flinched when he walked past, unsure what kind of monster they might be brushing shoulders with. Elias ignored all of it. He sat on his bunk, pulling out the tiny candle he had saved the night before. He lit it, watching the flame flicker while the block filled with murmurs. 2 inmates down the row whispered. He moved before Bruno swung. Man's out training. What kind of training? I heard CIA. Nah, military. Nah, he's too calm. Military guys still show heat. Maybe an assassin? Assassins don't get caught. Unless they want to be. That last line traveled through the cell block like electricity. Kai returned and sat across from Elias. You're freaking people out. Elias didn't look up. People fear what they don't understand. Kai leaned closer. So explain it. Elias finally met his eyes. I'm not here to impress anyone. Or terrify anyone. I'm not here to be anything I used to be. Kai swallowed. Used to be? Elias gave him a long, heavy look. A man who trained people you don't want to meet. Kai's eyes widened. What do you mean trained? Elias blew out the candle. That was another life. Before Kai could ask more, the cell door slammed open, and Officer Mills stepped in. Ward. Mills said, voice echoing off the metal. Warden wants to see you. Elias didn't react. He stood calmly and walked past Mills without hesitation. Kai watched him go, heart thudding, not because Elias looked scared, but because Elias looked like a man who'd been called into darker rooms before. The warden's office. 15 minutes later. Warden Harlan folded his hands across his desk as Elias entered. Sit. Elias did. The warden watched him for several seconds. You've made an impression in 24 hours. Elias stayed silent. I know who you are, Harlan continued. Or at least, who you used to be. Elias's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Harlan leaned forward. You think silence keeps your past buried? Son, men like you don't come to prisons like this by accident. Elias breathed in slowly. I'm not that man anymore. Harlan studied him. You may believe that, but Stone Ridge won't let you stay quiet for long. Elias lifted his gaze. Then I'll have to try harder. Harlan shook his head. No, you'll have to survive. He dismissed Elias with a wave, but his eyes stayed troubled the whole time Elias walked out. Back in the block, the whispers grew louder. The quiet man wasn't quiet anymore. He was a puzzle, a threat, a ghost of the past no one could fully trace. And Bruno Cray, bruised ego throbbing like a wound, decided one thing. If the quiet man was dangerous, then Bruno needed to be the one to break him first, even if it killed him. The cafeteria incident should have been a warning. A man who takes a punch like that and stays standing, stays calm, stays collected, that's not normal. But Bruno Cray wasn't a man who believed in warnings. He believed in dominance. And dominance, to him, meant reaction. The fact that Elias Ward didn't react was an insult deeper than blood. By the time the sun scraped over the razor wire the next morning, Bruno had convinced himself the entire prison was watching him for weakness. And in Stone Ridge, weakness was fatal. If you let your crown slip, even once, someone else was already reaching for it. Marco tried to calm him down. Boss, you don't gotta rush this. Quiet man ain't even looking at you. Might not want to fight. Bruno snapped back. Yeah, and that's the problem. Everyone's talking like he's some kind of shadow legend. Ain't nobody respecting my name when that man walks around like he's air. Darnell leaned over the railing, watching the yard below. He moves weird, Darnell said, like he's seeing everything. Bruno snorted. Don't matter what he sees. I'm going to remind him who runs this place. He didn't say the truth out loud, that he'd felt something when Elias stepped out of the cafeteria after the punch. Not pain, not fear, something unfamiliar, a feeling Bruno couldn't label. And since he couldn't label it, he wanted to destroy it. The day unfolded quietly. Too quietly for Bruno's taste. Elias helped mop the East Hall, never lifting his voice. He made no new friends. He didn't boast. He didn't brag. He didn't explain himself to anyone. But that silence worked against him. Rumors multiplied. Talk circled the prison like a shark scenting blood. He moved before the punch. He saw it coming. He's trained. He's not normal. He's something worse. Stone Ridge had been home to ex-soldiers, fighters, gang hitters, boxers, and criminals of every category. But no one had ever seen someone take a punch from Bruno and look disappointed. Elias could feel the tension, though he didn't show it. He walked the yard quietly, watching the patterns, who gathered where, who whispered, who stayed still when they usually paced. He didn't have to be supernatural. He had spent half his life reading body language sharper than words. Kai stuck to him like a shadow. "Bruno's planning something," he whispered for the fourth time that day. "I know," Elias said. "You're not worried?" "I'm aware." "That's not the same thing." Elias looked down at Kai, his expression steady. "Fear is a waste of breath." Kai frowned. "But fighting back isn't?" Elias let the question linger but didn't answer. It happened during yard time, the moment Bruno stopped pretending patience and let humiliation calcify into rage. Elias was walking along the far fence, listening to the faint distant hum of traffic miles beyond the prison walls, when he caught the subtle shift in sound behind him. Footsteps too heavy to be casual, breaths too deliberate, bodies closing in from angles designed to trap. He knew the pattern instantly. He'd taught that pattern. Before he even turned, he could map the positions in his mind. 3 behind him, 2 to the left, 1 blocking the path ahead. Bruno stepped into view from the right, cracking his knuckles like the sound was a warning shot. "Round 2, he announced loudly. Dozens of inmates turned to watch. Some climbed the basketball fence. Others stood on benches. Officer Mills pretended to supervise, but leaned forward with calculated interest. Elias stopped walking. He didn't raise his hands. He didn't brace. He simply turned slowly toward Bruno like the commotion had interrupted his thoughts. Bruno grinned. "You thought yesterday was it? You think disrespect lasts just one day?" Elias spoke softly. "I didn't disrespect you. That's the point." Bruno roared. "You ignored me." Silence rolled across the yard. Most fights in Stone Ridge were predictable. Someone talked, someone shoved, someone swung. But this felt like the tension before a storm that didn't belong in a place built for thunder. Bruno stepped forward, chest out, chin high. "Today you ain't walking away. Today you fight back." Elias sighed, not in fear but in regret. "I told you. You don't want that." Bruno threw the first punch. Elias stepped aside. No flourish. No dramatic dodge. Just a small, efficient shift that let the force of the punch pass through air. Bruno blinked. He swung again. Elias moved a fraction. Bruno swung harder. Elias pivoted. The yard murmured with confusion. This wasn't luck. This wasn't fear. This was control. A man trained to read violence before it arrived. Bruno's face reddened. "Stop dodging." Elias shook his head. "Stop attacking." That angered Bruno more than any hit would have. He launched himself forward, throwing a flurry of wild, desperate strikes. Hooks, jabs, body shots. Anything to regain control over the moment fleeing from him. Elias didn't block. Didn't counter. He simply wasn't there when the punches landed. A shift of weight. A breath. A pivot. A calm expression that made the scene even more surreal. One inmate whispered, "That ain't boxing." Another shook his head. "Nope, that's something else." A third murmured, "I seen that before overseas. That's trained." Bruno threw a final, furious punch. Elias raised a hand. Not a strike. A catch. He caught Bruno's wrist gently, almost politely, and lowered it. Bruno froze. Elias's voice stayed soft. "You're strong. But strength without control is chaos." Bruno's breath shook. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not like he was stupid. Not like he was dangerous. But like he was lost. Then humiliation surged through him, drowning everything else. He yanked his arm back and shouted, "You think you're better than me?" Elias's answer was quiet. "No, I think you're becoming a man you don't have to be." That sentence hit Bruno harder than any fist. For a moment, the yard didn't breathe. Then Bruno snapped. He charged, roaring, swinging wildly. And Elias finally reacted, not with violence, with precision. He sidestepped the charge, hooked Bruno's shoulder, and guided him forward using Bruno's own momentum, sending the bully sprawling across the dirt in a clumsy roll that humiliated him more than any punch could. The yard exploded with whispers. He threw him. No, he redirected him. That's martial arts. No, that's military. No, that's assassin level. Bruno lay on the ground, breath ragged, pride shattered. Elias didn't smirk, didn't boast, didn't celebrate. He said only one thing. "I don't want to fight you, Bruno." And then he walked away. Bruno stayed on the ground long after the moment passed, because the worst kind of defeat isn't physical. It's when a man realizes the person he attacked wasn't trying to win. He was trying not to destroy you. That night, Stone Ridge simmered with an energy it didn't know how to contain. Fights happened daily. Beatings happened hourly. But what Elias Ward did in the yard wasn't a fight. It was a message, one the inmates couldn't decipher, and one Bruno Cray couldn't forget. As lights out buzzed through the cell blocks, Kai Ramirez stared across the dim space at Elias. The older man sat on his bunk, elbows resting on his knees, head bowed, breath steady. Kai had dozens of questions swirling in his mind, but one overshadowed everything else. "How did you do all that?" he whispered. Elias didn't respond. His silence wasn't dismissal. It was careful, controlled. The silence of a man who knows his past was not built for young ears. Kai waited. When Elias finally lifted his gaze, it wasn't anger or annoyance that filled his eyes. It was heaviness. The kind a man carries when he knows the truth behind him has broken more people than it saved. "Kai," he said softly, "I didn't come here to be who I was." Kai swallowed. "Then who were you?" Elias exhaled, a long, slow breath, and the flame from the tiny candle flickered against his face, carving shadows that looked older than the prison walls. "You want the truth?" he murmured. Kai nodded with the seriousness of a soldier receiving orders. Elias leaned back against the concrete wall, eyes drifting to a place far beyond Stone Ridge. And then he told the story he'd never wanted to tell again. Years earlier, the facility, Elias Ward wasn't born quiet. He became quiet. He was born into chaos. He learned discipline. He mastered violence. And eventually, he taught others to master violence too. The government didn't call the program what it really was. They never do. Officially, it was Advanced Tactical Operations Training. Unofficially, it was something far older, far darker, far more precise. They didn't recruit soldiers. They didn't recruit fighters. They recruited minds. Minds that could kill a problem before it became one. Elias first entered the facility at 23, already decorated for instincts most men couldn't name. Not reflex, not skill, something deeper, an ability to see patterns before they formed, to predict a threat before it breathed, to anticipate violence the way others anticipate weather. He wasn't hired to assassinate. He was hired to teach assassins. Hand-to-hand combat wasn't about strength. It was about angles, timing, breath. Marksmanship wasn't about aim. It was about thought. Stealth wasn't walking softly. It was thinking invisibly. And Elias trained them all. Recruits half his age pushed themselves until they vomited. Recruits twice his size fell to mat because Elias moved like water around stone. Recruits with combat experience quickly learned something uncomfortable. Violence wasn't about brutality. Violence was a science. And Elias Ward was the architect. He trained ghosts, men and women no one would ever know existed. Operatives who could move through crowds without leaving memory behind. Operatives who could take down armed targets with a pencil, a shoelace, a rolled-up magazine. Operatives who never questioned Elias. Operatives who feared him more than any enemy they faced. Because Elias wasn't just skilled. He was precise, surgical, unpredictable. He taught them everything, from the rhythm of a heartbeat during combat to ways shadows shift in a room when a killer enters it. He taught psychological warfare, body reading, fear manipulation, silent takedowns, bone breaking, breath control, situational dominance. He taught them how to disappear. He taught them how to erase. He taught them how to end. And for years, Elias believed he was making the world safer, that every assassin he trained saved 1,000 lives in the shadows. But then came the mission that broke him. The mission, the child. The agency called it a routine correction, a rogue arms dealer, a hidden compound, a list of targets. Elias wasn't supposed to go. He was an instructor, not a field operative. But one of the recruits he trained panicked mid-operation, freezing at the worst possible moment. If Elias didn't intervene, everyone on the team would die. So he went. What he found inside the compound wasn't what the agency reported. There weren't just traffickers. There weren't just armed men. There wasn't just contraband. There was a child, a small boy hiding behind a rusted metal crate, eyes wide, shaking with terror. The operation was seconds away from collapsing. Gunfire echoed through the rooms. Team members shouted for extraction. The recruit Elias was supposed to say was pinned down under suppressing fire. Elias had one choice: complete the mission, protect the recruit, leave the child. But Elias Ward had spent years teaching others control, discipline, humanity. He couldn't turn away. He grabbed the child and shielded him with his own body as he moved through the compound. One of his operatives shouted, "Ward, what are you doing? That boy is not part of the mission." Elias ignored him. He escaped with the recruit and the child alive. The next morning, the agency didn't give him praise. They gave him a suspension. The child wasn't part of the mission. He compromised protocol. He jeopardized secrecy. Elias argued that saving a child wasn't a compromise. It was the only correct choice. The agency disagreed, and then they made their next move. They pinned a fabricated manslaughter charge on him, along with enough falsified intel to bury him legally. "You're too emotional for this world," his commander told him. "You're starting to think instead of obeying." And that's how Elias Ward, the man who taught assassins, ended up in Stone Ridge Prison. Back to the cell. Kai stared at Elias with wide, quiet horror. "They framed you," he whispered. Elias nodded once. "Why not tell the warden?" "No one wins against the people who train me," Elias said simply. Kai swallowed. "So, what are you now?" Elias looked down at his hands. Steady, relaxed, dangerous if they needed to be. A man who refuses to train killers ever again. Kai's voice trembled. "Bruno doesn't know who he punched." Elias exhaled slowly. "Bruno doesn't know what I used to build." Kai asked a question that burned in his mind. "So what happens if Bruno keeps pushing you?" Elias looked at him, not angry, not scared, resigned. "If he pushes me far enough," Elias said quietly, "then the part of me I buried will come back. And nobody in this prison wants to meet that man." After Elias's confession to Kai, the story didn't sink. It spread. Secrets in Stone Ridge never stayed private for long. They moved like whispers across a wired fence. By morning, Elias's past had become part of the yard's new atmosphere. Some inmates treated him with a wary respect. Others eyed him like a dangerous relic. Bruno's humiliation curdled into obsession. He replayed the laundry block in the yard over and over, shaping a plan that would fix his image or end him trying. Outside of that, Officer Mills sat in the guardroom with a different calculation altogether. He wasn't a man who wanted to put Elias back into isolation just because Bruno was bruised. He wanted leverage, profit, a show that justified the authority he wielded. The agency's fingerprints were faint in his memory, the way men like Elias were useful until they became inconvenient. He'd seen this pattern before, and he'd learned how to make it pay. Mills pulled his notepad across his desk, wrote Elias's name in the margin, and circled it twice. He had a plan that promised both spectacle and control. He would bait Elias, and he would make it look like self-defense when it ended badly. If Elias snapped, it gave Mills a chance to write the report the agency would want. A dangerous operative reactivated, dangerous behavior justified. If Elias didn't snap, Mills still got to humiliate him publicly and remind the yard who owned the narrative. Either outcome offered profit, the kind that kept the guard's nights shorter and his pockets lined. The bait had to be personal. Elias had told only a few things since he arrived. The story about leaving the program for a child, the vow to stop training killers, and the way he watched the younger inmates with soft, almost parental attention. The easiest tool was always a human one. Mills found his lever in Kai Ramirez. Kai's loyalty to Elias had been immediate, an orbiting admiration that felt like a lifeline. He followed Elias's movements, watched his breathing, tried to breathe like him. That made him the perfect lure. Mills cornered Kai one afternoon under the pretense of counseling, what guards called mentoring, which usually meant a mix of threat and manipulation. "Your friend's a puzzle," Mills said, voice low, like a man offering advice. Kai shifted uneasily. "You think he's trouble?" Mills smiled, the false friendly smile that meant you were about to be used. "I think you should be careful who you stand with, kid." He paused, letting the words sink in. "If you ever need help, come tell me first. Don't go running off to him when things get rough." Kai left wondering if the guard meant well, which was exactly what Mills wanted. Confusion. Later that night, when Kai's bunkmate dared him and teased him about being soft for following Elias, someone else threw in an ominous rumor. "You hear Mills got a job for anyone who'll help set the quiet man off?" The idea was planted like a seed. Bruno didn't need much convincing. He'd been whispering with Leon from the Iron Dragons, and now he had a plan that would look clean. Lure Kai into a corner where Bruno's crew could ambush him, force Elias to come running, and then film the reaction. Mills would stumble onto the scene to make it official. Camera angles, fake witness reports, a narrative that made Elias the aggressor. For Bruno, it was perfect. For Mills, it was profitable. For the rest of the yard, it was entertainment. Kai, who had only just learned the taste of being looked at with respect, suddenly found himself at the center of something poisonous. He didn't know how to refuse. He didn't know enough to see how he was being used. The night chosen was one when the light stuttered, an old wiring problem, and a detail Mills arranged to coincidentally exploit. Bruno's men knew the layout by heart. They would push Kai toward the old storage corridor near the laundry. No cameras, poor echoes, perfect for a stage incident. Kai trembled when he heard the plan. The fear in his voice made Bruno smile the way a hunter smiles at prey. But his fear also made him go. Kai believed the lie they'd told him, that if he didn't show up, Elias would be punished worse later. Loyalty can also be a chain. When Kai realized what was happening, it was already too late. The corridor was narrow and smelled of detergent and rust. The bulbs hung low and buzzed. Bruno stood at one end like a judge, Marco and Darnell at his side. Kai shuffled toward them, head bowed, heart hammering so loud it sounded like the machine hum. A shove sent him stumbling into a stack of crates. The plan was ugly and efficient. Stereotyped to look messy enough to be plausible, clean enough to look like a legitimate reaction when the guard arrived. Elias wasn't blind to the setup. He had a mind that cataloged variables like a chess player catalogs threats. He noticed Kai's absence first as a pattern. The kid who followed him like a shadow was missing from morning routines, missing from meals, missing from the small protests Kai would make when men tried to take his food. When the lights flickered that night, his breath tightened. He finished the prayer he'd learned in the facility, slid out of his bunk, and moved quietly toward the corridor. Mills watched from the top of the stairwell with a smug expression as the plan unfolded. He consulted his watch, pleased with the timing. He wanted to see what side of Elias's restraint was brittle. Was the vow real, or was it a mask waiting to crack? He'd bet on breaking him. He'd placed enough bets in his life to know how to make a man do what you wanted. Then the first sound cut through the hum, a stumble, a stray shout. Kai's voice came out thin and panicked. Elias moved faster. He didn't run. He walked with purpose, feet set, breath measured. He passed one guard in the hall, who made a show of not seeing him. He moved in a straight line toward the danger like a man returning to a scene he'd rehearsed a dozen times in his head. Inside the corridor, Bruno's men closed in. They moved amateurishly, overconfident and therefore clumsy. Kai was pressed against a wall, slumped against crates, hands pressed to a bruise forming on his cheek. Bruno spat near him like it meant something vital. "You want him, kid? Say it," Bruno taunted. Say you want the quiet man to come save you, and we'll make it worth your while. Kai's eyes darted to the dark at the other end of the hall. Elias appeared like a silhouette from the other side, calm and unhurried. He took in the scene with that same still gaze that had started all this trouble. Nothing in his face changed. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply walked into the circle of men. Bruno stepped forward, face twisted into a grin that tried too hard to look confident. Finally, he said, "Our little friend came through." He spat on the floor. Let's see if the ghost will come for the boy he likes so much. Mills started down the stairwell, his posture oiled with the satisfaction of a man who orchestrates consequences. He would be there to secure the scene and write the report. He'd make sure, whether Elias fought or not. It would look like the quiet man had lost control. Elias stood between Kai and the men who'd trapped him. He looked at Kai, then at Bruno, then at the guard stepping forward. He breathed in slowly and let it out, as if time in the air was keeping a promise. He said, not loudly, but clear enough for everyone to hear, "Let him go." The corridor held its breath. Bruno laughed, the sound bitter. "Make me." And that was the moment the plan fully shifted, because the man they tried to bait didn't panic. He chose. When Bruno said, "Make me," the corridor tightened like a throat closing. The air in that narrow hallway felt thick, heavy, charged. Kai's breath came in shallow bursts, his back still pressed to crates, eyes wide with terror he was trying to swallow. Bruno's men fanned out slowly, confident, careless, the swagger of men who'd never faced someone truly dangerous. Elias Ward stood in the center of them, like a stone dropped into a storm. Not braced, not coiled, simply present. His shoulders were loose, his posture unthreatening, his breath controlled like a man timing tides. Bruno paced forward, rolling his injured wrist with a wince he tried to hide. "You've been playing monk with me all week," he sneered. "Let's see what happens when I stop playing." He gestured for his men. "Teach him a lesson." Marco moved first, heavy, loud, and with all the grace of a battering ram. He aimed for Elias's ribs with a straight body shot. Elias didn't block it. He didn't counter. He took a half step back, let Marco overextend, and place a single hand on the man's wrist. A slight rotation, almost invisible, and Marco's momentum turned into a stumble. Elias didn't strike. He simply redirected. Marco crashed into the crates behind Kai, knocking one loose. Kai flinched as dust exploded from the impact. Darnell came next, faster, smarter, sharper. He'd been in enough fights to know strength alone meant nothing. He launched a hook at Elias's jaw, quick and tight. Elias dipped his head, letting the punch cut through empty space. His hand moved in a blur, not hitting, but guiding Darnell's elbow with surgical precision. The punch snapped past Elias's shoulder and nearly dislocated Darnell's own arm. Darnell yelled in pain, stumbling to the side. Again, Elias hadn't thrown a single strike. Bruno watched with growing dread. He'd expected resistance, not this efficiency. Elias moved like he'd memorized a room before entering it. Every strike thrown at him met silence, not weakness, not fear, but terrifying mastery of distance. Two more inmates lunged. One grabbed at Elias's shirt from behind. The other swung for his head. Elias pivoted sharply. Just one step, and the man grabbing him collided with the one swinging. Their skulls cracked together with a sickening thud. Both dropped, groaning. Elias stood between four injured men, without having delivered a single punch. The last attacker hesitated. He'd seen enough. He backed up a step, then another. "He ain't normal," he muttered. "This ain't worth it." Bruno grabbed him by the collar. "Get back in there." The man shook free. "Nah, I'm not dying for your pride, man." He bolted down the hallway, leaving Bruno alone with Elias and the bodies on the floor. Kai stared at Elias like he was looking at a myth he didn't fully understand. "Elias," he whispered, "how are you doing this?" Elias didn't answer. His eyes were on Bruno now, calm, steady, controlled. Officer Mills finally stepped into full view, arms crossed, watching like a spectator at a private execution. "Go on," he said coolly. "Let's see what you've been hiding." Elias's jaw tightened, not in anger, in disappointment. Bruno rushed him, roaring, the sound raw enough to hide the tremble in his voice. He swung high at Elias's temple, putting everything he had into the blow. Elias raised his hand, not to block, but to soften the impact, guiding Bruno's arm past him with gentle precision. Bruno stumbled forward. Elias caught him by the back of the collar, the way someone catches a falling child, and spun him around. Bruno swung again, panicked, sloppy. Elias slipped aside, tapped Bruno's elbow with 2 fingers, and the punch collapsed inward. Pain shot across Bruno's arm. He cried out. Elias stepped back. "Stop," he said simply. Bruno didn't stop. He couldn't. His pride had him by the throat. He lunged again, this time trying to tackle. Elias moved laterally, letting Bruno crash into the crates head first. Bruno groaned, collapsing to his knees. Still, Elias did not strike him. The corridor echoed with Bruno's ragged breathing. "Fight me!" he screamed, voice cracking. "Fight me?" Elias shook his head. "I told you, violence is not what you want." Bruno snarled weakly. "You scared?" "No," Elias replied. "I'm disciplined." Mills's patience snapped. He stepped forward, fury boiling under his skin. "Enough of this. If you're going to break, ward, then break. If you're going to snap, then snap. Let's see the monster you're hiding." Elias turned his head slightly. His eyes, normally soft, normally guarded, hardened for the first time. Mills felt that look like a temperature drop. "You want the monster," Elias said quietly, "because you think you can control it." Mills smirked. "I trained under the same program you did. I know how you people break." Elias stepped toward him once. Mills flinched. Elias didn't miss it. He spoke coldly. "You learn techniques. You learn drills. You learn commands. But you never learn control. You only learned obedience." Mills's face reddened. "Shut up." Elias took another step forward, slow, calm, inevitable. "The difference between you and me is simple. I trained assassins. You train paperwork." Bruno watched the shift, stunned. He'd expected Elias to be dangerous. But seeing Mills, of all people, retreat 2 steps told him something deeper. Elias wasn't just skilled. He wasn't just trained. He wasn't just dangerous. He was beyond all of them. Mills reached for his baton. "Back off." Elias stopped. He raised both hands slowly, not in surrender, but in a gesture of complete control. Over himself, over the situation, over Mills's fear. "If I wanted to hurt you," Elias said softly, "you wouldn't be reaching for that baton." The room froze. Kai, trembling, whispered, "Elias, please, don't." Elias lowered his hands. "I won't." He stepped backward, placing himself between Bruno and Kai, not aggressively, protectively. Bruno looked at him in disbelief. "Why?" Elias answered without hesitation. "Because someone has to choose restraint. If not me, then who?" Mills swallowed, suddenly unsure of his next move. Bruno, exhausted, humiliated, confused, slumped against the crates. His pride, the thing he valued most, felt like it had been dissected in front of him. Elias didn't strike a single man, but the hallway felt like a battlefield he had already won. From the far end, alarms began to blare, guards rushing, responding, finally noticing the commotion Mills helped start. Mills backed away, whispering under his breath, "This isn't over, Ward. I'll break you yet." Elias's eyes followed him. "No," Elias said quietly, "you won't." Because something had changed in that hallway, something Mills didn't expect. He hadn't awakened a monster. He had awakened the discipline that trained one. Stone Ridge felt different the morning after the corridor incident. The tension hadn't gone away. It had simply changed shape. Violence used to sit in the air like a lurking animal. Now it watched more carefully, as if it sensed a bigger predator walking the halls. Bruno Cray limped through the yard that morning, his wrist wrapped in makeshift bandages, his mouth set tight with pain and unwilling confession. The bruises weren't what broke him. The humiliation did. Prisoners observed him from a distance, the way animals observe a wounded alpha. The blow to his reputation hurt more than any physical injury. Men who once stepped out of his path now hesitated, unsure whether he still deserved the space. Dominance in Stone Ridge had always been simple: when loud, lose quiet. But Bruno had lost loudly, and against someone who hadn't even raised his fists. Marco hovered near him, tried to act loyal, but unable to mask the nervous twitch in his eyes. The rest of the crew scattered. Darnell refused to sit at Bruno's table during breakfast, muttering something about not dying for someone else's ego. Even some of the younger inmates, once eager to join Bruno's circle, avoided him now, because humiliation is contagious in a place like Stone Ridge. Bruno watched them all slip away. His grip tightened on his coffee cup until the plastic bent. Marco leaned in. They'll come back. They just scared. Bruno's jaw worked. Of who? Him. Marco swallowed. Maybe. He ain't normal, boss. Bruno shoved the tray away, the clatter echoing across the cafeteria. He leaned in close to Marco, whispering harshly, "Don't you dare say that. Don't you dare act like I'm scared of him." But he was. He knew it. Marco knew it. The yard knew it. Bruno had faced big men, strong men, even crazy men. But Elias Ward wasn't any of that. He wasn't muscle. He wasn't rage. He wasn't threat. He was restraint, and restraint terrified Bruno more than any punch. Because a man who chooses not to fight is a man who knows exactly how dangerous he is. Kai, meanwhile, carried the guilt of being used in the trap. He walked beside Elias nervously, hands stuffed in the pockets of his jumpsuit. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I didn't mean. They said they'd hurt me if I didn't go." "I know," Elias said gently. "I should have told you. You didn't need to. Fear makes people choose quickly." Kai looked up at him. "Were you scared?" Elias paused in the middle of the yard. "Fear keeps a man alive," he said. "But fear doesn't control me." Kai nodded, trying to understand, but not fully grasping the depth. Elias placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You're safe with me." Kai believed him. Fully. Perhaps more than he believed any promise he'd ever heard. Officer Mills watched them from the tower, teeth grinding. The plan hadn't gone the way he expected. He didn't get the explosion he wanted. He got something worse. Elias hadn't snapped. He didn't lose control. Instead, Mills witnessed something rare. Precision without brutality. Advantage without attack. Discipline without collapse. It made Mills furious. He stalked into the break room where Officer Peterson and Officer Graves sat eating vending machine chips. "You two saw the report?" Mills snapped. Graves shrugged. "Looked like a fight to me." Mills slammed his palm on the table. "It wasn't a fight. It was a statement." Peterson frowned. "Ward didn't even hit anyone." "Exactly," Mills hissed. "He moved like he was trained for this. Like he's done this hundreds of times." Graves raised an eyebrow. "You jealous he's better than you?" Mills glared so intensely Graves looked away. "I'm telling you, that man is a threat. We need to push him, break him, get him to show what he's hiding." Peterson snorted. "Or maybe stop poking him before he folds like he folded Bruno." Mills walked out of the break room before he snapped at them. His plan hadn't failed. It just needed adjustment. He wouldn't get Elias to explode by hurting him. He'd get him to explode by hurting someone he cared about. And Kai Ramirez was first on that list. The yard shifted again after lunch. Bruno sat alone on the concrete bench where he used the whole court. The space felt empty around him, like the power he once radiated had evaporated. He stared at Elias across the yard, eyes full of something new. Not just hatred, not just anger, confusion. How'd he do it? Bruno muttered. Marco shrugged. "Fast hands." Bruno shook his head hard. "No, that ain't speed. That's knowing where someone's going to hit before they swing." Marco hesitated. "Like fighting prediction?" Bruno grabbed his collar and yanked him close. "No, idiot. Like he's done this his whole life." Marco didn't argue, because deep down, despite his ego, Bruno had one accurate instinct. Elias Ward wasn't reacting to them. He was reading them. Every move, every breath, every shift in weight. Bruno replayed the fight in the corridor over and over in his mind. He saw his swings missing not by luck, but because Elias had predicted them, like a teacher watching amateurs try their first drills. And the worst part was something Bruno hadn't shared with anyone. Elias looked sad. He remembered how Elias's eyes softened in the middle of the fight. Not pity, not contempt, but sadness. Like Bruno was a student failing a test he didn't understand. That wounded Bruno more than any physical strike. Later that day, as the inmates filtered back into the block, Warden Harlan summoned Bruno to his office. Bruno dragged his feet reluctantly. The warden didn't mince words. "Sit." Bruno sat, jaw clenched. Harlan stared at him across the desk. "Do you have any idea how close you came to triggering a lethal incident?" Bruno swallowed. "He started." "No," Harlan snapped. "He didn't. You did. And he still didn't hurt you." Bruno looked away. Harlan leaned forward. "Do you understand what that means?" Bruno gritted his teeth. "That he's weak." Harlan slammed his hand on the desk. "That he's controlling himself." Bruno flinched, not from the noise, but from the truth behind it. Harlan continued. "You think you beat him if he doesn't fight back? Son, if he wanted you injured, you'd be in the hospital right now." Bruno's jaw twitched. Harlan ended the meeting with a final warning. "Stay away from Elias Ward. I'm not saving you again." Bruno left with his pride shredded further, because being warned about another inmate was a final humiliation. When lights dimmed and the block settled into restless night sounds, Bruno sat awake on his bunk, his fists clenched, his pride bleeding, his fear undeniable. He had spent his whole life being the strongest man in the room. But Elias Ward wasn't just stronger. He was trained in ways Bruno didn't want to imagine, and that realization broke him more effectively than any beating. Bruno Cray finally understood. He wasn't trying to break Elias. Elias had already broken him without a single punch. By the time morning count ended, Stone Ridge felt unsettled in a way that had nothing to do with inmate politics. Rumors moved through the corridors like drafts under an old door. Prisoner senses shift. Officers walked with tighter posture, and even the warden staff behaved as if something important had broken loose beyond the prison walls. The change began when an unfamiliar black SUV parked near the administration building shortly after sunrise. Stone Ridge saw government cars often enough, but this one had a different weight to it. The windows were heavily tinted, the plates were unmarked, and the driver never left the vehicle. Most inmates never saw it, but Officer Mills did. And the moment he saw the matte black chassis and the subtle antenna on the rear bumper, a cold understanding formed in his stomach. "They're here," Mills murmured to himself. He walked quickly to the staff corridor, ignoring Peterson's questions and Graves' confused glances. Mills wasn't in the mood for explanations. He had been waiting for this moment. He knew the agency never left loose ends. And Elias Ward was the sharpest loose end they'd ever created. Mills reached the administrative wing and found Warden Harlan inside his office, speaking quietly with a man in a charcoal suit. The man had a posture that signaled government training, shoulders perfectly level, chin steady, eyes calm in the way someone's eyes become calm after spending years doing things they will never be allowed to admit. Harlan noticed Mills in the doorway. "Not now," the warden said, but the man in the charcoal suit turned. "Let him in." Harlan hesitated. "Agent Rowan, it's fine," Rowan said. Mills stepped inside. Rowan observed him for several seconds before speaking. "Officer Mills," he said, "you've been filing detailed reports about Inmate Ward." Mills nodded. "Yes, he's been unusual." Rowan's expression didn't change. "Your reports imply you understood what he was before he came here." Mills swallowed. "Yes." Rowan considered him. "I appreciate accuracy. Most officers don't notice the difference between a violent man and a trained one." Mills exhaled slowly, relieved to finally be speaking to someone who understood the distinction. Harlan folded his arms. "I don't like the idea of federal agents showing up without warning Rowan. If Ward is a problem, he's my inmate, my responsibility." Rowan turned his head slightly, an acknowledgement, not respect. "With all due respect, Warden, Ward stopped being your responsibility the moment he was booked." Harlan narrowed his eyes. What does that mean? It means, Rowan said carefully, that our institution does not permit its former instructors to walk freely in state prisons. Mills stiffened. Harlan looked confused. Rowan continued. Ward-trained individuals whose existence will never appear in any public document. His method-shaped operatives who influence events this facility isn't authorized to study. You have a man in your blocks who possesses knowledge that cannot be allowed to spread. Harlan scowled. He isn't training anyone. Rowan's gaze sharpened. Not yet, but you know as well as I do that violence follows him. Mills cleared his throat. He refuses to fight. That's what makes him dangerous. He chooses when to react. The others think that means he's weak. They don't see that he's disciplined. Rowan finished. Yes, I know. Harlan leaned on his desk. Why are you here? Rowan answered plainly. To take him. Harlan bristled. He's serving a sentence. We have procedures. Rowan folded his hands. Warden, Elias Ward was never meant to be here. The charge filed against him was administrative, not judicial. Mills blinked. Administrative? Rowan nodded. A classification designation, not a real conviction. Harlan froze. For the first time, he looked genuinely unsettled. You're telling me this man has no formal prison file? He has one, Rowan said, but not a real one. The implication sank into room like dense fog. Rowan continued. My superiors received word from an old contact inside the program. Someone who believes Ward's presence at Stone Ridge is becoming unstable. Someone who noticed that he's reacquiring influence. Mills stiffened. He knew that someone was him. Rowan glanced at him. Mills didn't deny it. Harlan sank into his chair. You want to remove him quietly. Yes. And if I refuse? Rowan's gaze remained steady. Then Stone Ridge will become a liability report. Harlan looked away, jaw clenched. Mills felt a wave of satisfaction. Finally, someone recognized what Elias truly represented. Not a threat of violence, but a threat of exposure. The agency couldn't risk the possibility that inmates or officers might learn how to weaponize the techniques Elias had buried. After a long silence, Harlan said, I'll need time to process this. You have until tomorrow morning, Rowan replied. Outside in the yard, Elias felt the shift without seeing the SUV, the agent, or the meeting. Years of training made him sensitive to changes in atmosphere. Even Stone Ridge's patterns were predictable. But this was different. Men spoke more quietly. Guards moved more deliberately. The entire prison felt like someone had tightened invisible strings. Kai walked beside him. You look worried. Elias kept his eyes on the sky above the razor wire. Something changed. What do you mean? Kai asked. Elias didn't respond immediately. He listened. He studied the behavior of the guards near the tower. He watched Mills speaking to Graves near the fence with unusual intensity. Finally, Elias said, Someone from my past is here. Kai froze. Someone from the program? Yes. Kai swallowed. What are they here for? Elias glanced at him. His expression wasn't fearful. It was resigned. They're here to take me back. Or to silence me permanently. Kai's breath caught. But they can't just... You didn't do anything. Elias cut him off gently. Kai, the program doesn't care about innocence. They care about control. Kai didn't know what to say. Elias looked out across the yard one more time, posture still calm, but eyes alert. They found me. And for the first time since he entered Stone Ridge, Elias Ward felt something heavy stirring inside him. Not violence, not panic. A realization. The past he had buried wasn't done with him. It was coming back. And it wasn't coming alone. The night before Agent Rowan's deadline felt strange inside Stone Ridge. Even the sounds, normal as they were, seemed distant, muffled, like the prison itself was holding its breath. Kai couldn't sleep. Bruno couldn't think. Mills couldn't wait. And Elias simply sat with his candle, watching the flame tremble like it already knew what awaited him. He had been hunted before, tracked before, but this felt different. Not because of danger, but because of closure. He had spent years trying to bury the man he had once been. But fate had an inconvenient habit of digging where it wasn't welcome. When dawn approached, Elias stood, slid the candle back into his locker, folded his blanket with the same precision he had folded 1,000 tactical maps, and waited for the door to open. It opened exactly at 7 a.m. 2 guards, Officer Mills behind them, and in the hallway, the unmistakable silhouette of Agent Rowan. Kai sat up on his bunk, panic rising. "Elias, what do we do?" Elias looked at him gently. "You stay calm." "Are they taking you?" "Yes." Kai felt his throat close. "You're not coming back, are you?" Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. "I'll come back in the only way that matters." Kai didn't understand, but he nodded anyway. Elias stepped out of the cell. Rowan waited, hands clasped behind his back. "Mr. Ward." "Agent Rowan," Elias replied. "You know why we're here." "Yes." Rowan signaled toward the administrative wing. "Walk with me." Elias followed. Mills walked behind them, chest swelling, convinced he was witnessing the moment he'd always imagined. The moment Elias Ward finally broke under pressure. But Elias wasn't breaking. He was remembering. Inside the warden's office, Harlan stood behind his desk, uneasy, as Rowan closed the door behind them. "Ward, for what it's worth, I don't agree with this." Elias nodded. "I know. You've been more stable than half the inmates in this place. Because I've had practice." Rowan took a seat. "Elias, your presence here jeopardizes operations. We can't just let a former instructor live freely in a state institution. Too many risks." Elias folded his hands calmly. "What do you want from me?" "Cooperation. Voluntary extraction. You come with us quietly. We take you to the facility, and everything remains contained." Elias studied him. "And if I refuse?" Rowan didn't hesitate. "Then you disappear." Harlan stiffened. "Rowan." "Warden." Rowan interrupted sharply. "This is beyond your authority." Elias's gaze didn't waver. "You're afraid of what I know." Rowan tapped a pen. "We're afraid of what you could teach." Mills stepped forward. "He's already teaching. You've seen it. The inmates follow him. They whisper about him. He's building something." Elias glanced at Mills. "The only thing I've built is restraint." Rowan interlaced his fingers. "You refuse to fight. That's the only reason we haven't had casualties. But restraint is still influence." Elias said nothing. Rowan leaned back. "You have until noon to decide. Cooperate willingly, or Mills escorts you to the yard for the alternative." Elias raised an eyebrow. "An execution?" Rowan didn't blink. "A removal." Harlan slammed a fist on the table. "Not in my prison." Rowan stood. "Warden, it will happen with or without you." Elias exhaled slowly. "I'll have my answer by noon." In the yard, 1 hour later. Stone Ridge felt unsettled. Electricity in the concrete. Inmates gathered in clusters, whispering, watching, waiting. Rumors spread fast. Some said the feds were here to break Elias out. Others said to kill him. Others said he was some kind of asset the government wanted back. Bruno sat alone on the lower bleachers, staring at the dirt beneath his feet. His body still hurt, but his pride hurt more. The idea of someone like Elias being taken by the government made Bruno feel even smaller. Kai ran through the yard like a desperate messenger until he reached him. "Bruno, they're taking Elias." Bruno snorted. "Good. Good." Kai snapped. "He saved your life." Bruno looked up slowly. "No, he let me live." "That's the same thing." Bruno shook his head. "Not in here." Kai grabbed his sleeve. "Help him." Bruno shoved him away. "Help him? I can't even help myself." Kai's voice cracked. "You're scared of him." Bruno stood, grabbing Kai by the collar. "We all are." But then something shifted in Bruno's eyes. Not admiration, not fear. A strange mix of guilt and clarity. "Kid," Bruno said quietly. "Where is he?" Kai pointed toward the far entrance of the yard. Bruno hesitated. Then he followed. The confrontation. Noon arrived. Elias walked into the yard escorted by Mills and 3 guards. Behind them, Agent Rowan waited near the center field where the yard opened into a large circle of concrete. Inmates froze. Conversations died. Even the basketball stopped bouncing. Elias walked calmly, hands behind his back, as if heading into a meditation session rather than an execution. Rowan addressed him plainly. Elias Ward, one last chance. You come with us quietly. And if I don't? Rowan nodded to Mills. Mills smirked. Then I make it look like self-defense. Elias looked at him with no emotion at all. You want the monster so badly. Mills stepped closer. I want the truth. Elias whispered. You can't handle the truth. Mills swung first. He aimed for Elias's jaw, fast, trained, practiced. Elias didn't dodge. He caught the fist mid-air, gently, like he was stopping a child from hurting himself. The yard gasped. Mills froze. Elias leaned in. If I wanted to kill you, Mills, you'd already be gone. So stop pretending you're in control. And then he let go. Rowan stepped forward. Enough. Take him. 3 armed tactical officers moved in. Elias didn't resist. He simply closed his eyes, accepted the cuffs. And that's when the unexpected happened. A voice shouted from the bleachers. Stop. Everyone turned. Bruno Cray walked forward, fists clenched, shoulders squared. His crew didn't follow. His friends didn't back him. He came alone. He stood between Elias and the armed officers. Rowan frowned. Move aside, inmate. Bruno shook his head. No. Rowan's expression darkened. This doesn't concern you. It does, Bruno said. Because if he walks out that gate like a criminal, it means all the monsters win. Rowan scoffed. You have no idea who Elias Ward is. Bruno stepped closer. No, you don't. Kai ran beside him. He saved us. All of us. Other inmates began stepping forward, not in aggression, in unity. One by one, they formed a loose half-circle around Elias. Not attacking, blocking. Rowan looked around the yard as more and more men stood between him and Elias. What is this? Rowan hissed. Harlan stepped into the yard from the far gate. It's called humanity, the warden said. Something your program forgot. Rowan turned red with frustration. You're interfering with federal. No, Harlan cut him off. I'm preventing an unlawful removal. Mills pointed at Elias. He's dangerous. Harlan snapped back. He's the calmest man in this yard. Rowan raised a hand. Step aside. All of you. No one moved. Elias finally opened his eyes. He looked around at the inmates, men who once feared him, hated him, misunderstood him, standing in front of him now like shields. He breathed in, then out. I'm not going with you, Elias said to Rowan. I won't teach killers anymore. I won't be your weapon. Rowan glared. You can't walk away from the program. I already did. Harlan stepped forward. If you want him, bring a court order. Rowan's jaw tightened. This isn't the end. Elias nodded. It is for you. Rowan gave a long, cold stare, then signaled his team. Stand down. We're done here. The officers uncuffed Elias and retreated. The gates buzzed open. Rowan disappeared with his team, furious and defeated. The yard erupted in whispers. Elias stood still, breathing slowly. Kai hugged him. You're safe now. Elias placed a hand on his shoulder. No, Kai. I'm free. Bruno stepped forward awkwardly. Thanks for not killing me. Elias nodded. Thank you for standing up. Bruno shrugged. You made it look easy. Elias smiled faintly. It was never easy. The sun broke through the clouds. The yard felt different. Stone Ridge felt lighter. Elias turned toward the block, walking past the inmates who now saw him, not as a ghost, not as a threat, but as something rare inside a place built to destroy men. A man who survived without losing himself.